Okay, let's get to our panel. Joining me now from Berlin is Matthew Karnitschnig. He is Chief Europe Correspondent for Politico. Also joining us via Skype from Salzburg, Austria is Roland Tichy. He is the Editor-in-Chief of the conservative publication Tichy's Einblick. And with us from Lima is Remi, Piet. He is a research fellow at the University of Miami and he's a close observer of European politics. Welcome to all of you to the show. Matthew, let me start with you in Berlin, and let's start with that Swedish election last weekend. As you heard in our report there, the Sweden Democrats, it's a nationalist populist party, won about 18% of the vote. And we have seen in many countries in Europe where the right has been growing that immigration has been the issue. Was that the case in Sweden as well?
Well, I think it certainly was. You heard afterwards some academics coming out saying, well, migration was one of many issues, but that certainly seems to have been the one issue that galvanized the public there, and that certainly dominated the debate throughout the election campaign. So I think that it's pretty clear that in a number of Northern European countries, I'd say, including Sweden, including Germany, and including Austria, which took in a lot of refugees during this influx that began in 2015, you're seeing a lot of the same political pressures around migration, around what this is going to mean for the countries going forward in terms of their ability to integrate these newcomers, in terms of what the influence of Islam is going to mean in these societies that have been traditionally influenced by Christian values.
And Matthew, I guess for Sweden, which, as you heard in our report, has been seen very much as a tolerant country, a country that was open to immigration, to immigrants coming from other parts of the world, there must have been a tipping point at some time that, you know, led to the growth of the right wing in that country. Where did that tipping point come? Was it in the last 2 years or the last year?
It has been building for some time, certainly, and if you look back to the last election in Sweden, I think the Sweden Democrats improved by about 5 percentage points. But that's just that one party. I think you also have to look at the influence that they've had on the entire political landscape there and how they have forced the mainstream parties to really change their position on these key issues regarding asylum, regarding integration, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the result of the Swedish Democrats that one should look at, but rather the entire picture, which means, you know, really having a closer look at the policies of these mainstream parties. And certainly this whole issue came to a head, as I said, after the influx that began in 2015. And you've also seen an increase in violence, or at least the perception that violence has increased in places like Sweden and places like Germany. There's a lot of debate about that, about, you know, whether the refugees are really responsible for this or not, and what the statistics actually say. But I think that there is this fear in the public in many countries that too many people have come at once, and that is becoming a problem. And previously, you know, Germany, Sweden, they'd always taken in refugees, Austria as well, right, but it wasn't as many. And I think that the issue here is this sudden influx of such a large number is worrying a lot of people.
All right, let me bring in Roland Tichy. And Roland, let's talk about Germany. In Germany, you have the Alternative for Deutschland party, known as the AfD. They also made very big gains in the election last year. We just saw a very big demonstration in the German city of Chemnitz in support of that party. There was actually a counter-demonstration as well. But if we look at the AfD, how did they become so popular in Germany, and what exactly do they want?
Well, as Matthew said, migration is maybe the mother of all those problems. This is a word uttered by the Minister of the Interior in this country. In fact, Germany took since 2015, let's say, about 2 million, maybe even more if you count European migrants. And this is a great number of people coming in. It is one of the big cities in the land which should be built up totally new for migrants. I think it is very fast migration. It is uncontrolled. And it is without visible limits, and this makes people fear. And the AfD is the party which expresses these fears. And as always in Europe, the rise of the right-wing parties is the decline of the Social Democrat parties. This is especially in Germany, especially in Sweden and in Austria. And I think politics should handle with this migration question seriously, not only with words. And this is the center of lots of problems. I had yesterday a discussion with schools in Austria and Vienna, and 60% of the pupils don't speak German there. And this is a situation you have in Rome, you have in Brussels, you have in Berlin. So what happens to the schools? What happens to housing? What happens to a kind of society? So as I said before, some countries in Western Europe opened their borders, but didn't manage the coming migration, and so people get angry.
Remi, Piet, certainly, as we've been hearing there, immigration, racial tensions, those factors are playing a role in the growth of extreme right-wing groups in Europe and the growth of nationalist parties. But what about other factors like disillusion with the European idea, dissatisfaction with the idea of European integration?
Yeah, obviously, the immigration elements has been a factor that has intensified the rise of extreme right movements, but that's not, the only thing here. I mean, there's been a progressive evolution of far-right movements in several countries in the European Union, but that dates back from much before the Syrian crisis. And the issue here is at different level, in the political level, economic, social level. We should actually analyze each one of those three more deeply. Politically, there's a disbelief towards the European Union, and the belief that the European Union has not been effective in trying to foster and protect the population and help economic growth in a continent that has been way below other standards in the world today, but also a misunderstanding that the European Union doesn't have the budget to be able to strongly invest in different economies. Economically, there's this feeling that immigration will actually lower salaries, especially for less educated portion of the population, and I understand that in the long run, actually, immigration might be a strength for several countries that are seeing a low level of birth and will need intensified demands on the market. And socially, obviously, those populistic groups, whether from the far right or the far left, are eager to actually talk about the cultural gap that can be with immigration issues, going back to nationalistic and populistic platform, and that intensifies, therefore, different parties that are on the extremes in the upcoming elections of May 2019 for the European elections.
Right, certainly a lot of factors playing into this. Matthew, let's talk about a man, a party, and a country that's getting a lot of attention in Europe right now, and that is Matteo Salvini. He is the leader of the right-wing League Party in Italy, and he's taken a very strong anti-immigration view in Italy. Why is he attracting so much support? And he's also a very controversial figure. What do you know about him?
Well, I think he's a controversial figure, as you say, because he's made it clear that Italy isn't prepared to take in any more refugees. And Italy has been on the front lines of this crisis for a number of years. And he feels that, as many Italians do, that the rest of Europe has just stood by and watched and hasn't really helped Italy. And Italy has been left essentially to its own devices to deal with this crisis, which is more an accident of geography than anything, because many of the migrants who are coming via the Mediterranean, and their first stop is Italy. So, he is really, I think, the result of a European policy that has failed for a number of years, and he is one of the most strident populists in Europe at the moment. There is some question about his long-term support for the European Union and for Italy's membership in the Euro common currency. So these are sort of crises that could emerge in the coming months and years, and it's really difficult to see an easy way out of it for the rest of Europe at the moment. I mean, this is really one of the major pressure points now, that you have a quite strident populist with Salvini in power in one of the biggest European countries. It's something else if they're in power in a smaller country, and that has been difficult enough if you have somebody like Viktor Orban in Hungary for the European Union.
Right.
But to have populists in control of Italy really takes things to another level.
Yeah, I want to get to Viktor Orban in just a moment. But Roland, we have part of a statement that was made by the deputy leader of the Alternative Germany Party, the AfD, that we've been talking about. She was talking about her solution to the immigration crisis. Let's watch.
If there are hundreds of thousands illegal migrants in our countries who are not allowed to be here, they have to go. Of course they have to go voluntarily, but if they don't do so, of course we have to force them to leave. That's very clear.
How difficult is this approach going to be, Roland? Is there a more humane way of dealing with this rather than just forcing people out of the country?
It is difficult. Germany, on the one hand, has a very good asylum system, so that people who are accepted as asylum seekers get within a minute access to the social security system and can stay in the country. Those who are not accepted as asylum seekers should go out, but they are not brought out as a matter of fact. So this is a situation in which hundreds of thousands are in between this and nothing. And this is a situation which is very, it becomes a crisis. But the migration influx every society movement. The hospitals are overwhelmed, the schools are down, and so people want that their interests are represented. I think the word of populism is difficult. It's a blame game with words. The voters chose those parties that represent their interests, and their interest is that the society works, that they do have work, that they have jobs, that they have housing, that these pupils are in good schools. And this is absolutely at the moment in Germany not sure for the future.
Right. Remi, Pierre, I want to get back to something that Roland raised earlier on, and that was the integration of these new immigrants in countries in Europe. We heard during the Swedish election, there were concerns expressed over issues like crime, social order, perceived threats to the national way of life. We haven't just heard this in Sweden, we've heard it in other countries as well. Can these countries in Europe successfully integrate these new immigrants into their societies, or is it going to become an issue in the years ahead? Is it going to become, as Roland pointed out again, part of the blame game, saying, you know what, the ills that beset our country, they're caused by immigrants?
I mean, obviously, there's been a massive flow of immigrants during the last 3 years, but actually this number of arrivals have strongly decreased over the last few months. So the refugee crisis in itself, in terms of sheer numbers, is actually more behind us than anything. The issue is indeed in question of integration and trying to, European economies have the capacity to integrate workforce, especially the Syrian, for example, that are actually more educated than most immigrants, and to include them inside the economic model. Now, the problem that you have and why this is creating so much unrest in Europe is this lack of a European project, of a clear vision of what it is to be having a European identity, and I'm saying more a civic identity and an ethnic identity, so a European model of integration and policies which is pro-democracy, which is pro-freedom, and which is actually including all aspects of, secularism. And this is what is, some people are worried about that would disappear with the arrival of population that are not coming from the same, regions. Now, if there were a strengthening of a European message, a real, focus maybe led by President Macron or Merkel, any other key European leader that could be offsetting the populistic discourse based on very small, very few issues of security that are being overblown in national media, we will probably not have this rise of far-right movement, and we'll be seeing that indeed there's a capacity to integrate population into a future European Union that will integrate a series of different differences, like the model of the European Union was supposed to be.